Jail Mail, letters from the defendant to Robert Baker, may they be marked collectively as Peoples 235.
They may.
Showing you the first one dated August 14th, where it starts out, I will see you in a few hours. Once again, is this one of the letters that was recovered from the defendant's cell or from Mr. Baker's after it was night?
Yes.
And in this particular letter, again, does the defendant talk about going, taking a bus to Van Nuys? To you, yes?
Yes.
To your knowledge, did this case start out in the Van Nuys courthouse for the first couple of appearances?
Yes, it did.
And once again, does this letter appear to contain lipstick prints along with the same type of codes we saw last week, ride or die, on my mind, with the signature Mrs. Robert Baker?
Correct.
Looking at the next one, which appears to be 11 pages in length and is dated August 9th. It looks like maybe and 10th.
Yes.
Starting out again with that same type of code, LOML.
Yes, love of my life.
And further down, does the defendant talk about that she's going to change her name from Sementilli?
Yes, she does.
And is that something that you also overheard in jail conversations or lockup conversations between the defendant and Robert Baker?
Yes.
Once again, on the 11th page, at the end, does the defendant sign this letter, yours eternally, Monica /Madonna Baker?
She does.
Showing another letter that appears to have an envelope that is addressed to the defendant from something Baker in Cascade. Is that the same location where the North County Correctional Facility is located that we talked about last week?
Yes, and I recognize as well the booking number after Baker, 5016213.
This one here?
Correct.
And the defendant's booking number?
That's correct.
And in the course of this letter that was sent to the defendant recovered from her cell, did Mr. Baker again indicate the protocols
That we and everyone has in place.
keeps us from remotely accessing or discussing this craziness, correct?
Yes, correct.
Another letter that is 6 pages in length. This one appears to have the date of August 8th at the top. Again, in this letter from the defendant to Robert Baker, does she use again the term my baby that we saw in some of the other letters last week?
Yes,
With the same type of codes that we talked about last week.
correct?
And further down on the front page, where it's highlighted, did the defendant indicate, I'm crazy about you and I will go to the ends of the earth to feel your kiss again?
She did.
And on the last page, again, do we see that same code for ride or die, and the other phrases, love Monica Baker for eternity?
Yes.
A 4-page letter from Robert Baker to Mrs. Baker, soulmate, saint, bestie.
Yes.
Is this again one of the letters that was recovered from the defendant's cell?
Either Robert Baker's or Monica Sementilli's, I don't recall.
And here, does Robert Baker indicate you may be the happiest
Proudest.
and proudest man in this world when you accepted me as your true man, even husband,
Your husband.
your husband. Thank you. And on the last page, right above the signature line, where it's highlighted, did he indicate to her, you are my love of my life, my all, my wife for all time, love you with all,
Yes.
your H. For
Correct.
husband?
Correct.
Are these a sampling of many such letters that were recovered from either the defendant's cell or from Robert Baker's cell as examples of kites passed to one another?
I'm going to object to speculation. It's argument.
Overruled.
Yes.
Showing you what's been previously marked as People's 177, this screenshot of an email from Detective Parshall. Was this screenshot also found when you did your review of the Celebrate reports on the SD card found in Robert Baker's Ford Expedition, item 157?
It was.
Also, pursuant to a subpoena, did you review voicemails that were left by the defendant to Procter Gamble with respect to stock options and restricted stock units?
I did.
Your Honor, I have a stipulation.
Stipulation we mark as 236.
Yes, thank you. Stipulation, voicemails by defendant to Procter & Gamble Company equity programs. The recorded voicemail messages contained in People's Exhibit 158, which is the flash drive, Your Honor, were received by the Procter & Gamble Company, P&G, and forwarded as emails to the Procter & Gamble email address for P&G's Equity Awards program, which includes stock options and restricted stock units. 1. The 34-second long message identified as exhibit, can the audio be marked, please, as Part of 230, oh, maybe you want them separate. Do you want it as 237 and then the transcript's 238?
Yes.
237, audio. 238, transcript was recorded on February 13, 2017 at 2:16 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. The P&G voicemail system identified the phone number that left the voicemail as the Sementilli residence at 818-854-6055. The 40-second long message identified. Do you want me to mark it as a subsequent number, or do you want me to continue it?
Is part of 237 or talking about something else?
It's another one. There's two. There's three altogether. Two more.
All right, we'll mark that separately, 238.
239.
I'm sorry, that was my fault. 239.
Thank you. Identified as the audio in Exhibit 239 was recorded on March 9th, 2017, bless you, at 1:40 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. The P&G voicemail system identified the phone number that left the voicemail as the Sementilli residence, again at 818-855. The audio being 239, the transcript as 240. And then the 34-second long message identified as Exhibit 241 was recorded on March 9th, 2017 at 6:59 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. The P&G voicemail system identified the phone number that left the voicemail as the cellular phone number 818. Transcript, please, Your Honor, being 242.
Yes, all those others we has more.
Thank you. The parties agree that each of the preceding records contains a true and correct record of an act, condition, or event of the business, and that the business's respective custodian of records or other qualified individuals would testify as to its identity and mode of preparation. Further, that the records contained in each exhibit were made in the regular course of business at or near the time of the act, condition, or event, and that the sources of information and method and time of preparation were such as to indicate the records were trustworthy, pursuant to Evidence Code Section 1271. And we won't play them.
Not yet.
You can do so.
I haven't received the stipulation yet.
Oh, counsel join in the stipulation?
I do?
Now I receive it.
Thank you.
On behalf of you.
People join. Now, I want to ask you about the investigation that you conducted into the outstanding third suspect on this case that was observed jogging towards the Sementilli residence at 4:18 on January 23rd, along with Robert Baker. Can you tell us the steps that you took in your investigation in order to identify that individual?
It took a while because there was a lot of use of burner phones and such things such as that to sort of make it difficult for me. Initially, we started with looking at things that sort of stood out to us as out of the ordinary. We looked at many individuals, starting out with where did Robert Baker go on the day right after the murder, on the days right after the murder, who did he contact, who did he call, who did he have conversations with, and through that investigation there were several names that came up.
Okay.
One of them was Alfred Birdsong.
That's the individual that we heard about from Roger Brown when you were here last week.
Correct.
Who lives in Las Vegas.
Yes. There was another individual named LaShane Holmes, who I knew that Robert Baker had met while they were incarcerated together, that lived in the Orange County area. He contacted him on the day that the crime was committed and also stayed with him on several occasions after the murder. There was, and then interesting that what we found was a Facebook message that was sent on, I believe it was January 25th, from Robert Baker's Facebook account to an individual named Christopher Austin. And when I started looking into that, it was very rare that they communicated via the Facebook Messenger app.
When you say they, who are you referring to?
Robert Baker and Christopher Austin. There was only a couple messages, and I believe the last one before the one on the 25th of January in 2017, they hadn't communicated via that Facebook Messenger since I think the end of 2015.
Okay.
So it was concerning. So we started to look into Christopher Austin as a suspect at that time.
I'm sorry, can we get a date?
You inquire, it's not shown yet on cross.
Thank you.
And so after you observed that Facebook message,
Yes.
what did you do?
Initially, we looked into Christopher Austin, and the information I had at the time was that he lived in Fayetteville. And so we wrote, my partner and I at the time, Esther Mayapi, wrote a search warrant for flight manifests to see if we could determine if Christopher Austin flew to the LA area during the time period of the murder. Just to touch on why we wanted to know that is because via cell phone records, we knew that Robert Baker was in the area of Los Angeles International Airport on January 22nd, 2017, between the hours of 7 and 8 in the morning.
So that was the day prior to the murder.
Yes. So we tried to figure out whether Christopher Austin flew into Fayetteville. We also had records where we had a very high suspicion that on the night of the murder, the evening of the murder, around 6 or 7 o'clock, I believe, Robert Baker's cell phone hits in a tower that's in the area of what we call, what we know as the Los Angeles FlyAway, which is a bus service that takes people to the airport. And we did a lot of research to try and figure out if we could determine whether Chris Austin, because we knew via the records or had pretty high probability that Robert Baker did not go back to the airport the night of the murder, return somebody to the airport.
So you had, just so I can follow what you did in terms of your investigation, you initially started with looking at communications between Baker and other third parties, correct?
That's correct.
And one of those, which has already been previously marked, was a Facebook message which was part of Curtis Davis's PowerPoint, which is Exhibit 156. This message here that occurred on January, it looks like 26, 2017.
Correct.
From Robert Baker to Chris Austin, download WhatsApp on your phone. Is that what you're referring to?
Yes, and that stuck out to me as an investigator, number one, because they very rarely, as I said, chatted via the messenger. And number two, we know that WhatsApp is an encrypted cell phone messaging application.
And so then you went back and noted that Robert Baker was in the area of LAX per his cell phone records the day prior to the murder, and that at some point on the day of the murder, subsequent to the murder, you said his cellular records indicated he was in the area of the Van Nuys FlyAway.
Correct.
For those of us that don't know what the Van Nuys FlyAway is, tell us what that is.
It's like a bus service. You take a bus to the airport, your luggage and everything. It's usually a very full bus. A lot of people utilize it because it's an inexpensive option to get to the airport. And they make stops at every terminal, and they also have, I think they depart maybe every 15 minutes, if I remember correctly, and they pick up on the same schedule. So when you come back, there's a special area at the airport that you wait at, and the FlyAway bus comes and picks you up. And they have a parking lot where you can park, or you get dropped off at the FlyAway.
Okay. So someone could drop you off at the FlyAway, and you would be able to get transport to LAX.
Correct.
Did you also investigate how one might pay for a ticket from the Van Nuys FlyAway to LAX?
Yes. At the time, I had a colleague, Sergeant Ann Pickering. She worked Van Nuys. I asked her to go to FlyAway to do some research for me because I wanted to know how long they retained credit card information, and also if you could pay for the service with cash.
And the Van Nuys FlyAway, just for those of us that maybe aren't as familiar with the San Fernando Valley, the Van Nuys FlyAway is in the San Fernando Valley, correct? Correct.
It's, I believe, off of Roscoe, and it's very close to the 405 off-ramp.
Okay. And so then what did you do?
Well, I found out that we got sort of mixed information, but ultimately we found out that they accepted only credit cards, but that the system was purged after, I believe it was 2 months.
Okay. And so you told us you came on to this case, I believe you said it sometime in 2019.
Correct, the very end of 2019.
Okay. And so by then, obviously, more than 2 months have passed.
Correct.
So then what did you do?
So then we started, at that point, I couldn't really come up with any information that, other than that connected Austin. And so we started looking into the other participants, Birdsong and Lashane Holmes, and other names that kind of came up that needed to be investigated, and did that for about 6 months.
Okay. And then did you note that after that Facebook message from Baker to Austin that they no longer communicated through their regular phones?
So I believe it was 2021, probably mid-2021, I started to pick up that we kind of came to a crossroads on the third suspect. And I might add that was really my primary goal on this case. The case when I came on was solved.
In terms of when you say solve, what does it mean to solve a case for LAPD's purposes?
I'm gonna object, that's already.
That's overruled on that ground.
Go ahead.
So stand on that ground.
So your primary goal, you said, was to try to identify the outstanding suspect.
I had two focuses. One, to carry the case through the court's process on the individuals that were in custody. And the second was to try to identify and arrest the third suspect.
Okay. And
Or,
so,
actually, any additional suspects, because it's my opinion that there's more than 3 suspects involved.
okay. And you were aware when you got the case, when you say that it had already been, I can't remember the term you just used. Solved.
Yes.
That there had already been filings and one of the charges pending, as in this case, is a conspiracy.
Yes.
All right. And so what did you do at that point in order to try and identify any outstanding members of the conspiracy?
I thought the best way to approach it was through the phone records. It's kind of all we really had, because there was a lot of steps taken to protect identities. So I...
That's not responsible,
It's overall.
As you talked about, because of the use of burner phones and things of that nature.
Correct.
Okay. And we talked about, I believe, on Friday, the fact that Robert Baker, on the
Date of January 29th, prior to the time that he came to the Sementilli home,
to attend the memorial, he had purchased 2 burner phones that day.
Correct.
You said one was an LG stylus, I believe, and one was a ZTE flip phone.
Correct.
It is.
And one of those phones, as you talked about, the ZTE, traveled to Canada when the defendant went to Canada on January 31st.
Sustained.
So based on that, what did you do next?
So I started to really focus. I took another closer look through the murder book, because any time that you sort of inherit a case from somebody, as opposed to being the assigned investigator from the get-go, you're kind of at a disadvantage because you don't have the recollection of any of the interviews.
It's all relevant.
It's overall.
And so numerous times I had to go back through and really read the documents of the investigation. One of the ones I found, of course, was the interview of Roger Brown that I had missed in the first pass through the book, where he talked that Baker gave him an alternate phone number.
And so what did you do in order to look into that particular phone number?
So I looked through the case files and I realized that the CDRs for that phone number were already in the records. So I just sort of looked through them, and since the date was just a few days after the murder, I wanted to see who was the first person that Robert Baker had contact with on this burner phone. Because when you get a burner phone, it's so that you can talk to people that you don't want law enforcement typically to know you're talking to.
Okay.
And I found a number I didn't recognize. I don't recall the entire number, but I know that the area code was 314. There's really not, if not any, there's very few numbers within Robert Baker's cell phone records with a 314 area code. And when I ran the number, I found that it was another prepaid burner phone that was purchased in Anchorage, Alaska. And that's when that was a big find for me, because when I was doing the research into Christopher Austin, and I couldn't connect him coming to the States from Fayetteville, and then I remember doing some more research into him, and I was like, well, he doesn't even live in Fayetteville, he lives in Anchorage, and so that's what kind of led me off of him. But when I found out that there was now this prepaid burner phone that somebody had purchased in Anchorage, Alaska, that was the only name in my investigation that I knew was connected to Alaska.
Okay. And that particular number, that was 31429.
Correct.
Okay. So given that you had been looking at various people and there was only one individual who was in Alaska, then what did you do with respect to that prepaid burner phone purchased in Alaska?
So then I researched that phone and I found out that it was purchased on, I want to say, January 30th of 2017 from, I believe it was a T-Mobile within the Anchorage Mall. And when I researched the address of the Anchorage Mall, it was about 6 miles from where I knew Chris Austin was living at the time that phone was purchased.
Okay. And so then what did you do? Did you start doing some records checks and things of that nature?
Records checks, I noticed that during the time that virtually the only person that Chris Austin communicated with on that burner phone was Robert Baker. And on the once he purchased that burner phone, and he never communicated with Robert Baker again on their regular cell phones, which they had communicated frequently as a way to communicate because they lived in different states. But after the murder, they never communicated on their regular cell phones again and only communicated through these burner phones.
Okay. And so once you were able to determine that, then what did you do with respect to trying to corroborate any evidence that you had that would suggest that Christopher Austin was one of your outstanding suspects?
So I wrote a series of search warrants trying to place him. It was important to try and place him, of course, in Los Angeles during the time of the murder. I found out that he had since moved to Vancouver, Washington, but I was really focused on that Alaska time period. So I wrote a series of search warrants to the airlines trying to find a manifest that had Christopher Austin on it, and coming into LAX on January 22nd during the time period where we know that Robert Baker picked somebody up.
And what did you discover based on your records review after those search warrants were written?
I discovered that on between the dates of January 12th and 13th, Christopher Austin went on the internet application Kayak, which is sort of a travel. You can book airline rental cars and hotels through them, and purchased airfare to Los Angeles on January 22nd, coming home on January 24th. And the Alaskan Airlines also attached a flight manifest that had him leaving Anchorage, Alaska, very early in the morning of the 22nd, making a connection through Seattle and landing in LAX at around 7:30 in the morning.
The same time as you told us that the records indicated that Robert Baker was in the area of LAX on the day prior to the murder.
Correct.
Okay. Then what did you do?
Studied the records some more and found out that although he had Christopher Austin had purchased a ticket to return to Anchorage, Alaska on the 24th, it appeared that at around 11:30 at night, he
On which day?
on the day of the murder, on the 23rd at about 11 at night, he was at LAX. He went up to the ticket counter and actually paid $180 to switch his ticket and fly out that evening,
So
that night.
When you say at the ticket counter, you're now talking about at LAX.
He's at LAX at the ticket counter to Alaskan Airlines, and he changed his flight that was scheduled from the 24th so that he could fly out that night late on the 23rd.
Okay. Did you also attempt to gather any phone records to see if that might assist you in,
I did.
and with respect to Mr. Austin?
Yes.
And what did you learn from a review then of his records once you narrowed down this flight from Alaska through Seattle to LAX on the 22nd, and then we have him on 11:30 at night on the 23rd at LAX changing his ticket?
His phone appeared to be, from the records, turned off. There is no, his phone is not communicating with any cell towers the entire time until we know that his flight landed back in Anchorage in the early morning of the 24th. Then the phone came back on,
Okay.
and hits on a tower in Anchorage, Alaska.
Okay. Consistent again with what you had gathered and learned from those flight manifests and the paying of the ticket to change the flight for $180.
Correct.
Okay. So then what was the next thing that you did?
So in this case, there was some unidentified DNA. We know there was unidentified DNA in the passenger compartment of Fabio's Porsche. I thought that could be from a suspect, also could be from a family member or anybody else, but I set up with the authorities in Vancouver, Washington, to obtain a surreptitious sample of Christopher Austin's DNA to be compared to the unknown samples in this investigation.
And how did that turn out?
They used a ruse and brought him in. I believe he had a...
You spoke with someone in order to accomplish this in
Yes.
Alaska?
Yes, a deputy in Vancouver. And they used a ruse. Christopher Austin had been the victim of a crime, I believe, and they asked him to come in so that they could talk to him about it. And I believe the crime was that there was some mail that was taken out of his mailbox, and they asked him when he came in, because it was post-COVID, to wear a mask. They also asked him, I think, to sign something, and when he left, they recovered the mask, and they recovered the pen that he used to sign the document, and we were able to obtain DNA from both those samples, which they made sure that they were clean instruments to collect the sample. They didn't have other people's DNA. They didn't give him a used pen or a used mask. So we knew it was Austin's DNA on that mask and the pen.
But yet, when you submitted it to the lab, they weren't able to find any DNA in the passenger compartment, correct? That matched up to him.
Correct. Christopher Austin's DNA did not match the unknown samples in this case.
And you knew that the Porsche that was purchased by Fabio Sementilli, that was stolen during the flight from the crime scene on January 23rd, was a used vehicle with unknown DNA from whoever potentially had ever sat in that seat before.
Call for speculation and no foundation.
Sustained.
You knew that it was a used vehicle, right?
Yes, and through interviews in the...
Sustained.
And what then, once you came to that crossroads with respect to not having any DNA tying Christopher Austin to the front passenger seat of the Porsche, then what did you do?
Well, typically I know in these cases from my experience that this is a case on Christopher Austin, the case to build the case against Christopher Austin. I was going to probably need a confession of some sort in order to move the case forward.
Okay. Because at this point you only knew that he had come in to Los Angeles the day prior and left at some point after the murder.
That, I had that, and his physical descriptors matched the physical descriptors that were on the initial crime report of the third suspect as far as height and weight. His general body, I was able to access his Facebook profile, and his appearance was very similar to the surveillance video, the person depicted in the surveillance video running up to the crime scene with Robert Baker.
But then again, you had the two individuals that were running up to the location of the Sementilli residence were wearing, as we saw in the video, baggy clothing, covering their faces, covering their hands, covering everything but their maybe nose and mouth.
Correct.
Okay. So generic information, nothing specific, but you knew at least you were in the ballpark.
Correct.
Okay. There was nothing that you found that excluded him.
Correct.
All right. And so at that point, did you, were you nearing a time of your retirement?
Yes, I was. There were efforts made prior to my retirement to do an operation where I could try and elicit that confession, but this is a case where I felt I had one shot, and if he refused to talk to me, then number one, he knows I'm looking at him as a suspect, and anything that I wanted to do as far as a Perkins operation or anything like that afterwards, I couldn't do.
Okay.
So I felt that it would be very important to do a Perkins operation, and unfortunately, when I attempted to do that in mid 2023, I believe, I just didn't have enough to obtain an arrest warrant for him in order to do that, and the authorities that I was that were assisting me in Vancouver were not comfortable doing an operation with me without an arrest warrant.
And at this point in time, when you said Vancouver, you're talking about Vancouver, Washington, correct?
Yes, Vancouver, Washington.
And at this point, based on your records check, did you determine that whether Christopher Austin was still living in Alaska or whether at that point he was living somewhere else?
Yes, he had moved to Vancouver, Washington.
Council, let me interrupt. Let's take our morning recess.
15 minutes. The admonition applies. See you back here in 15 minutes.